My name is Staff Sergeant Daniel Edward Harper, United States Army. I was a rifle squad leader in 2nd Platoon, Company A, 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Infantry Division. We were the boys they sent into France on the morning the world calls D-Day. I'm an old man now. My hands tremble when I button my shirt, and my knees complain louder than any sergeant I ever served under. But when I close my eyes at night, I am 23 again, smelling wet canvas and salt water and cordite, and I hear the voices of men who have been gone from this earth for more than half a century. This is their story as much as it is mine. If I speak too long, it is only because it takes time to bring the dead back properly, even if only in words. I first met most of the men in my squad in England in the winter of '43, when the rain felt like it was trying to drill right through your skull, and the whole of southern England seemed to be made of mud and tea and impatient Americans. We lived in Nissen huts that leaked at the seams and rattled in the wind like old tin cans. The British called them huts. We called them plenty of other things. That was where I first saw Private Joseph Russo, Joey, standing on a wooden crate in the middle of the barracks, doing an imitation of our company commander. "Gentlemen," he barked in a high, nasal voice, hands clasped behind his back, packing with exaggerated dignity. "It has come to my attention that some of you still believe you are individuals with free will." The men howled. Even I, newly promoted and not yet sure how to wear authority, let myself grin. Joey was from Brooklyn, you could tell before he opened his mouth. Quick with a wisecrack, hair slicked back when he could get his hands on enough grease, and a grin that could have sold you your own boots. When he noticed me watching, he hopped off the crate and snapped a mock salute. "Evening, Sarge, just boosting morale, you know." "Keep it down, Russo," I said, trying for stern and landing somewhere closer to amused. "If the lieutenant hears you, I'll be writing letters for you instead of with you." He winked. "Then I'll make sure I give you some good stories to put in those letters." Behind him, Corporal Elijah Walker sat on his bunk, reading a little black Bible by the light of a single bare bulb. Eli was from Kansas, cornfields and church bells. He had a calm way about him, like he'd made peace with the world and was only waiting for it to catch up. When I called his name during roll call, he answered with a clear "Here, Sergeant," and when we drilled, he moved with the sort of quiet competence that made you glad he was on your side. One bunk over sat Private First Class Sam Levine, polishing his radio with almost religious care. He had sharp, watchful eyes and wire-rimmed glasses that were always slightly smudged. Sam was from Chicago, son of a tailor who'd come over from Poland before the Kaiser's War. It was only later, when we were already in it up to our necks, that he told me his grandparents hadn't been so lucky getting out. "I've never even met them," he said once, staring into his mess tin of black coffee as if answers might float up. "But I keep thinking, while we're sitting in lectures, while we're running drills, they're somewhere under Hitler's boot, and here I am checking the oil on a radio set." "It won't be lectures and drills forever," I told him. "We'll get our turns." He nodded, jaw tight. "That's what I'm afraid of, Sarge, and what I'm hopping for, both at the same time." Doc came last. Technician 5th grade Michael Santoro, our medic, a short, broad-shouldered Bostonian with knuckles like walnuts and hands as gentle as any I've ever known. He'd been a pre-med student until money ran out and the war came in. The Army gave him bandages instead of a degree. "The tuition's murder," he'd say, checking over his aid bag, "but the lab work is unforgettable." Beneath the jokes, his eyes were old, older than any of ours had a right to be. Our platoon leader was 2nd Lieutenant Richard Hanover, West Point class of '42. He arrived one cold, gray morning, coat pressed so sharp it could have cut you, bars on his helmet shining like new coins. To us, he looked impossibly young, but at the same time he walked with that rigid, careful confidence you only see in men who haven't had their orders tested by reality yet. He stood in front of us at formation, reading off names, eyes flicking up now and then as if he was trying to memorize each face. "Staff Sergeant Harper," he said at last. "Oh, yes, sir. Your 2nd squad, correct." "Oh, yes, sir." He nodded. "I'll be counting on you, Sergeant. The men will look to you first." I'd worn 3 stripes for only a few months. Hearing it from him made them feel heavier, but I only nodded and said, "We'll be ready, sir." He believed it. I wanted to. The days in England bled into one another. We trained until our muscles shook and our lungs burned. We crawled through obstacle courses, leapt into ditches, fired until our rifles were so hot you could have fried eggs on the barrels. At night, we lay in our bunks and listened to the distant rumble of bombs over London and wondered, each in our own way, how many more nights of listening we had left before we became part of that thunder. One evening, the rain finally let up. leaving the world smelling of wet grass and coal smoke. I found Eli sitting on an overturned crate outside the hut, Bible closed on his lap, looking at the thin strip of sky between the clouds. "You all right, Corporal?" I asked. He smiled faintly, just thinking Sarge. "'S about home. About the commandments." He tapped the worn cover of the Bible. "Thou shalt not kill," hard verse for a soldier to sit with. "What do your pastors say about it?" I asked, genuinely curious. "They say there's killing and there's murder, that sometimes you have to fight to stop worse sins." He shrugged. "Some days that makes sense, some days I think it's just words we use so we can sleep at night." "What do you say?" He looked at me steady and clear. "I say I'll do what I have to protect the man next to me, and I'll spend the rest of my life asking forgiveness for it." I didn't know then how heavy those words would become, but I remember feeling a strange sense of comfort. If a man like Eli was wrestling with it, then maybe it was all right that I was too. The orders we'd all been half waiting on and half dreading came wrapped in secrecy. Briefings behind closed doors. Maps unfurled on tables, officers tracing lines across the English Channel with their fingertips. Names of French towns we'd never heard of, Vierville, Colville, suddenly became as familiar on our tongues as the streets back home. They took us one platoon at a time into a tent where a big plywood model of a beach sprawled across sawhorses. Tiny houses, tiny cliffs, thin lines of sand, and little sticks for obstacles. A captain pointed with a swagger stick, voice calm and measured. "This is Omaha Beach. This sector here, dog green, is yours." I remember Joey leaning in, squinting. "Looks easy from up here, Sarge, like a sandbox. Don't know what everybody's so nervous about." Doc gave him a look. "You ever see a sandbox that shoots back, Russo?" We boarded the ships in the dark, waves slapping against the hull, boots clanging on steel. The air smelled of diesel and salt and nervous men. They crammed us into a hold that hummed with the throbbing of engines and the low murmur of voices wobbling on the edge between joking and prayer. I stood with my squad under a bare light bulb, checking straps, helmets, weapons. Eli helped Private Charlie Bennett adjust his gear. Charlie had joined us only a week earlier, a baby-faced kid from Alabama whose helmet still looked too big for his head. "You all set, Bennett?" I asked. He swallowed. "Yes, Sergeant, I think so." "You think so, or you are." He met my eyes with an effort. "I am, Sergeant." "What are you scared of?" Joey asked, nudging him. "Hell, kid, it's just a boat ride. I've had worse taking the Staten Island ferry." Charlie tried a smile. "Ain't never left Alabama before the Army, Russo. Boat rides are new to me." "You'll be sightseeing in France by lunchtime," Joey said. "Little wine, little cheese." "Cut it, Russo," I said, though part of me needed his patter as much as Charlie did. "Save the tourist routine for when the Germans roll out a welcome mat." Sam sat on an ammunition crate, cradling the radio set like a baby. He stared at the deck, lips moving silently. Later, I found out he was counting in Yiddish, a habit from childhood, he said. When he was scared, the old syllables came back. We waited, the engines hammered. Somebody started humming Bless 'em all, and somebody else shushed him. A few men were sick in the corner. Doc moved through us, handing out little pills for seasickness and quiet words that did more good than the pills. Then the voice came over the loudspeaker, flat and distant. "Stand to, prepare to load into landing craft." The hold erupted into movement, packs hefted, helmets adjusted, rifles gripped tight. We passed through narrow steel corridors to the main deck, where cold air slapped us in the faces like a bucket of water. Dawn was only a gray smear on the horizon. Around us, ships stretched as far as the eye could see, dark shapes riding the swells, each one belching out lines of men into the bobbing rectangles of the landing craft below. We climbed down rope nets into those boats, the sea yawning hungrily beneath us. Men slipped, cursed, caught one another by straps and sleeves. The landing craft stank of fuel and fear. We packed in shoulder to shoulder, front to back, so tight you could feel the other man's heartbeat against your ribs. The coxswain, a Navy kid who looked like he should still be in high school, shouted over the engine, "Keep your heads down and your asses lower. We'll get you there." Eli stood at my left, Joey at my right, Sam behind me with the radio. Charlie ended up near the front, too close to the ramp for my liking. Doc hovered near the rear, checking his bag again and again as if bandages might multiply under his fingers. The boat lurched away from the transport, dropping into the waves hard enough to make men stagger. Spray lashed at us, cold and bitter. Through the gap above the ramp, I could see only a sliver of gray water and gray sky. It started as distant pops, like someone crumpling paper. Then the sound grew, a rising crackle and thud, and the water around us began to jump with tiny white splashes. "Artillery," Sam said, voice thin. Joey shouted toward the bow, "Hey, Navy, you call that driving? You're zigging when you ought to zag." The coxswain didn't answer. His jaw was clenched so tight you could have used it to crack nuts. We rode up a swell, slammed down, and somewhere ahead, another landing craft vanished in a blossoming fountain of water and flame. Men stared eyes wide as bits of metal and wood rained down. Someone began to sob. Someone else started praying aloud. I felt it then, the slow rise of fear from my gut into my throat, a cold hand closing around my heart. For a moment I saw myself from above, just another helmet in a packed boat, no more important than any other. The vastness of the sea, the thundering of guns, the thin skin of the craft between us and oblivion, it pressed in on my mind like a vice. "Harper," Eli said quietly, "you're breathing too fast." I blinked, realized I was gulping air. "I'm fine," I lied. He nodded once. "Good, because we're going to need you." There was no more time. A great rush of sound swept over us, shells screaming, machine guns rattling, men shouting. The coxswain bellowed something I couldn't hear, and then the boat ground against sand or obstacle and lurched to a stop. "Drop the ramp," he screamed. Time slowed. I remember the metallic whine as the ramp clattered down, the sudden gray light flooding in, and then the front of the boat filled with water and splashes in red. The first two men in front never even took a step. Bullets tore into them, snapping their bodies backward. The man behind them stumbled over them, pitching forward into the surf. Men screamed and pushed, trying to get out, trying not to be the ones at the front. "Out, out," I shouted, though my own legs felt rooted. Charlie was there near the front, eyes huge. Our gazes met for one frozen heartbeat. "Go, Bennett," I roared. He went. I jumped after him into water that came up to my chest, icy and surging. My pack dragged me down, rifle held over my head. All around me, men splashed and floundered, some going under and not coming up. Machine gun rounds stirred the water into frenzy, plumes erupting inches from helmets. "Keep moving," I yelled, spitting seawater. "Forward, get to the shingle." Joey slogged beside me, bar held high, cursing in a steady stream like a man clinging to a lifeline of profanity. Sam stumbled once, the radio dragging him sideways, and I grabbed his harness, hauling him upright. "I can't swim that well, Sarge," he gasped. "Then don't drown," I snapped, because there was no room in my head for anything but blunt survival. We forced ourselves forward, every step a battle against water and fear. I saw a man ahead lose his helmet to a bullet, his hair puffing in a brief, ridiculous halo before a second shot took him. Another man, hit in the leg, flailed and screamed until the weight of his gear pulled him under. Doc splashed toward him, but a mortar shell landed nearby, tossing waves and bodies alike. I don't remember exactly how I reached the relative shelter of the shingle, a low ridge of stones and debris at the high tide mark. One moment I was in the surf, feeling the drag of the channel trying to take me back. The next my knees slammed into pebbles, and I clawed my way behind a twisted chunk of metal, gasping. Eli threw himself down beside me. His helmet was dented, a fresh crease along one side. He touched it with disbelief and let out a shaky laugh. That's close," he said. "Congratulations," Joey panted, sliding in on the other side. "You can now testify the Lord works in mysterious ricochet paths." I risked a glance up and immediately ducked as bullets chewed the sand inches from my face. The beach was a nightmare brought to life. Men pinned behind flimsy obstacles, bodies lying sprawled and unnaturally still, smoke and sand and wire, and the unrelenting hiss and slam of incoming fire. Lieutenant Hanover appeared, crawling along the shingle like some desperate lizard, shouting to be heard over the din. "We've got to get off this beach," he yelled, face smeared with sand and sweat. "Harper, get your squad ready to move. We'll bound up to that seawall there and then to the draw." I stared at the distant seawall, barely more than a line, maybe 50 yards away at the base of a grassy slope that led up to the German positions. 50 yards of open, bullet-scythed sand. "Sir, anyone who stands up out here gets cut down," I shouted back. He grabbed my shoulder, eyes fierce. "If we stay here, we die. If some of us move, maybe some of us live. Those are the choices, Sergeant." He was right, God help me, he was right. I turned to my men. They looked back at me with faces streaked in grime and something deeper. Expectation, fear, trust. "All right," I said, forcing my voice steady. "When I say go, we go. Short bursts, find cover where you can. Joey, you lay down fire on that nest there. See it, Sam, stay with me. Eli, you bring up the rear, keep the stragglers moving, we clear. They nodded, some more firmly than others. I took a breath I was sure might be my last. A go! We exploded from behind the shingle, boots pounding the sand. The world narrowed to the harsh rasp of my breath and the staccato wink of muzzle flashes on the slope above. Bullets snapped past like angry bees. Men all along the line rose and ran, some falling almost immediately, others stumbling, regaining their feet, pushing on with grim stubbornness. I felt the air twitch beside my cheek as something hot and fast passed close enough to burn. The sand leaped in little spurts around my boots. Someone screamed behind me, high and raw. Do not look back, I told myself. Do not stop. Halfway to the seawall, a shell burst ahead, throwing up a fan of sand and smoke. I dropped to my knee instinctively, then forced myself onward, using the crater as a brief shelter. Joey skidded in beside me, breathing hard. You still with us, Sarge? He barked. Move, I shouted, shoving him. Keep moving. We scrambled the last yards and flung ourselves behind the seawall, a cracked concrete barrier no taller than a man's chest. Men piled up along it, gasping, eyes wild. Lieutenant Hanover slid in, cursing softly, clutching his arm where a bloody groove showed through torn fabric. You hit, sir? Doc asked, already reaching. Just a scratch, Hanover snapped. Save it for the men who really need it. Doc hesitated, then nodded and moved on, crawling to a man whose leg was pumping blood through shredded trousers. Above us, the German guns never stopped. They swept the beach, raking back and forth. Every few moments, a shell screamed in and exploded with a concussive thud that seemed to lift the air itself. We were pinned again, just a little closer now, and still somehow we pushed on. Piece by bloody piece, we clawed our way up that murderous slope. We followed blown craters and sparse patches of earth where German fire slacked for a heartbeat. We used smoke when artillery gave us any. We dragged one another up, shouted and shoved, and sometimes simply refused to lie down even when every instinct screamed to hug the dirt and never move again. I don't remember my first clear shot at a German that day. I remember only a flash of field gray in a slit trench, the jolt of my rifle, the small backward jerk of a distant figure. Afterward, when the adrenaline drained and the noise faded to a dull roar in my ears, that moment sat heavy in my chest. A man on a hill doing his duty as I did mine, and suddenly not. It was Eli who saw the shadow cross my face. You did what you had to, he told me later, when the beach was behind us and the dead had been gathered as best they could. How many of them will we have to before it's over? I asked him. He looked away, as many as it takes for us not to have to do it again. We linked up with other scattered elements of the company among the dunes and the low, scrubby hedges beyond the bluffs. The world inland seemed impossibly quiet after the storm of the beach, as if the countryside itself were holding its breath. We set up a hasty perimeter in a small orchard, apple trees torn and splintered by shell fire. Sam got the radio working after beating it with his fist and muttering something in Yiddish that I suspected wasn't very holy. We called in our position, listened to the crackling voice on the other end tell us where we were supposed to be, which was not where we actually were. Lost already, Joey said, leaning against a tree, helmet askew. We just got here. Shut up and eat your rations, Doc told him, shoving a K-ration box into his hands. His own fingers shook as he tried to light a cigarette. Charlie sat with his back against a trunk, staring at his rifle as if he'd never seen it before. His face was speckled with dried blood that wasn't his. I crouched beside him. You did good out there, Bennett, I said. His eyes lifted to me, pale and hollow. I saw Johnson get hit, Sergeant. He was right next to me and then he was, like somebody just snuffed him out. He didn't even, his voice trailed off. He was a good soldier, I said gently. We'll remember him, that's all we can do now. He was joking about home not even an hour before, Charlie whispered. How can a man be there 1 minute and the next there's just nothing? I didn't have an answer. I patted his shoulder and stood. Later, by a low stone wall, I found Doc sitting alone, staring at his blood-soaked hands. How many did you lose? I asked quietly. Too many, he said. Too fast. I never even got their names. He scrubbed at his fingers with a rag that was already more red than white. What if I missed one? He murmured. What if there was something else I could have done? You did what you could, Doc. That's not the same as doing enough. No, I agreed, but it's all any of us have. That first day in France stretched into a lifetime. But somehow, by the time the sun slid red behind broken hedges, we were still there, bloodied, shocked, but there. And as more units pushed off the beaches, the weight of the whole American army began to press itself inland, yard by deadly yard. The hedgerows came next. No one had told us about those. Thick earth banks topped with tangled brush and small trees, turning every field into a little fortress. Normandy became a maze: advance 100 yards, hit a hedge, fight the men behind it, then do it again. We learned to fear fields that looked peaceful. We learned the hollow thunk of mortars leaving unseen tubes. We learned the peculiar stomach-churning sound of tree bursts, shells that detonated in the branches, spraying razor-edged splinters downward. One sticky afternoon, not long after we'd taken a village whose name I've long since forgotten, we lay in a ditch catching what rest we could. The air buzzed with flies and the faint, sour stench of death that never quite left the summer wind. "Hey, Sarge," Joey said, fiddling with the bipod of his bar. "You think the French'll be mad we're redecorating their countryside with bullet holes?" "Thought you were from Brooklyn, Russo," Sam said. "Since when do you care about French interior design?" "What can I say?" Joey grinned. "War's broadened my horizons. After this, I'm gonna open a cafe. Little tables, red and white towels, real coffee, no more of this army swill. You boys can come by, I'll give you the family discount." "What family?" I asked. "You kidding, you're looking at it." He waved a hand at the squad. "I'm stuck with you mugs for life." "You planning on us all making it that far?" Eli asked quietly, not unkindly. Joey's grin faltered just for an instant, then he shrugged. "Someone gotta keep you from turning into Monk's Walker." Doc, lying on his back with his helmet over his eyes, spoke up. "Just make sure your cafe's near a hospital. Business'll be booming after this mess." We laughed because the alternative was harder. That evening, we bivouacked near a stone farmhouse that had miraculously escaped destruction. The family that lived there, a gray-haired couple and a little girl with hair the color of wheat, watched us with wary eyes as we set up within sight of their orchard. Lieutenant Hanover approached them with our interpreter, a lanky corporal whose French was inventive at best. After some halting exchanges and plenty of gesturing, the farmer's wife disappeared into the house and returned with a loaf of bread, still warm, and a bottle of homemade cider. She pressed them into Hanover's hands, her eyes suddenly wet. "Merci," she said, voice trembling. Then in halting English, for chase away les Boches. Hanover, whose French extended about as far as bonjour, looked briefly flustered, then he bowed his head. "You're welcome, ma'am," he said softly. We're trying." Later, the little girl crept closer to our fire, curiosity winning over fear. She stared at our rifles, at our faces, at the stars on our shoulders. Sam, whose grandfather had once traded jokes with French customers in his tailor shop, dredged up a few phrases. "Tu as famed," he asked her, "are you hungry?" She nodded cautiously. He handed her a chocolate bar from his ration pack. Her eyes went wide as saucers. "Americaine chocolat," Sam said, smiling. She bit into it and made a blissful little sound that made some of the tension bleed from the air. For a moment, sitting there in the flicker of the fire, watching a child discover chocolate in the middle of a war, I felt something loosen in my chest. We were not only destroying, we were, in some small way, bringing sweetness too. That was the night I met Corporal Isaac Brown, though he wasn't part of our company. He came in on a supply truck just after dusk, a tall, broad-shouldered man with skin the color of polished walnut and a mouth that curved easily into a grin despite obvious weariness. The truck was marked with the insignia of a quartermaster unit, and the driver sitting beside him, pale, freckled, and nervous, didn't look half so capable. "Got your beans and bullets, Sergeant," Brown said, hopping down and stretching his back. His accent carried the slow music of Georgia. "You folks make a habit of choosing the worst vacation spots." "We're simple country boys, Corporal," Joey said. "Anywhere we can get shot at and eat cold stew, we're happy." Brown chuckled. As we unloaded crates together, I noticed the separate line of cots and tents his unit had pitched on the far edge of the field, apart from ours. The Army's rules followed us even into France. "You ever wish you were out here with a rifle instead of behind the wheel?" I asked him quietly, nodding toward the front. He snorted. "Sergeant, I'm catching enough stray shells back at the depots. Don't need to give the Germans any more chances at me. Besides, somebody has to keep you fellas in bullets. You run out, this whole operation grinds to a halt." His eyes darkened for a moment. "They offered some of us a chance to volunteer for a tank battalion, colored unit. I thought about it, but my mama," he shook his head. "She said, son, there's enough ways to die. Pick the one where you can see the road in front of you. So here I am." We talked a while, trading stories of home. For that brief space, leaning against crates under a foreign sky, we were just two men far from where we started, trying to make sense of a world turned upside down. "Keep your head down, Sergeant Harper," Brown said when he climbed back into his truck. "I'll be back with more coffee that tastes like motor oil next week." "Bring sugar next time," I told him. "If the quartermaster ever finds any, I'll steal you some." He drove off in the darkness, his silhouette merging with the night. I never saw him again. Whether he made it through, I do not know. War is full of people who step into your life for a heartbeat and then vanish down roads you never travel. The fighting ground on. It swallowed days and men and towns, chewing them all into fragments. We took one village then another, each a variation on the same theme. Stone houses shattered, church spires shell-scarred, cows wandering bewildered among the ruins. Sometimes we were greeted with tears and flowers, sometimes with shuttered windows and silence. Liberation, we learned, did not look the same to everyone. In one such village, we had a moral choice thrown in our faces like a bucket of cold water. We just pushed the last Germans out when we heard a commotion in the town square. A crowd of villagers had gathered, rough and angry, dragging a woman by the arms. Her dress was torn, her hair loose, her face pale with terror. "What's going on?" I asked our interpreter. He listened, then grimaced. "They say she slept with the Germans, collaborated." The crowd jeered, shouting words I didn't need translated to understand. Two men held the woman while another came from behind with a pair of scissors. He slashed at her hair, hacking it off in jagged clumps. She struggled, sobbing, but there were too many hands on her. "Jesus," Joey muttered. Sam's jaw clenched. "This is what they do, I've heard about it, shaving the women's heads, public shame." Lieutenant Hanover pushed through the edge of the crowd. "We're not here for this," he snapped in English. "Break it up." The villagers barely glanced at him. Their rage had closed them up from reason. They'd been powerless under the German occupation, and now that they had someone weaker than themselves to punish, they seized it with both hands. The scissors man finished his work, stepping back to reveal a woman transformed from a human being into a symbol of betrayal to them, of something uglier and more complicated to me. She hugged herself, shorn head gleaming in the harsh daylight, eyes searching the crowd for mercy and finding none. "Sir," Eli said quietly to Hanover, "we can't just let them." "We also can't start a fight with the people we just liberated," Hanover hissed back. His knuckles were white around the grip of his pistol. "Damn it, this isn't our war to police." He stood there, jaw working, caught between interfering and looking the other way. In the end, he did what most of us did in those situations. He stood very still, fists clenched, and pretended not to see. The villagers paraded the woman around the square, their chants echoing off broken walls. That night, by the glow of a candle stub, Sam said, "We're here to stop monsters. But sometimes it feels like all we do is trade which boots are on whose neck." "You saying we're as bad as the Germans?" Joey asked sharply. "No," Sam said, "not like that, but hate it gets loose. It doesn't care whose uniform you're wearing." We fell silent. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters like insistent fingers. The longer we fought, the more our little family shrank. Some left quickly in bursts of smoke and blood. Others slipped away more quietly, on stretchers borne to aid stations and ships heading back across the channel. Eli's turn came on a gray morning outside St. Lo, in a hedgerow-lined field that looked just like every other and still manages to visit me some nights. We were pinned by a German machine gun in a barn ahead. Every time a helmet rose above the earth bank, the gun stuttered, spitting death. We couldn't move. We couldn't fall back. A squad from another platoon was caught out in the open, 2 men down already, their bodies twisted in the mud. Harper, Lieutenant Hanover, crawled to my side. His face was smeared with mud, eyes bloodshot. "We can't get artillery on it without risking our own men. We need someone to knock out that nest." He pointed to a gap in the hedgerow farther down, closer to the barn. It was a killing zone, a narrow break in the green wall fully exposed. But from there, someone might lob grenades into the barn from the flank. "I'll go," I said automatically. That's what leaders say, but my limbs felt heavy as lead. "No, Sarge," Eli's voice came soft but firm. He was crouched just behind me, rifle cradled. "Let me." "We need you here," I said. "You need someone who can throw straight and run fast," he answered, a hint of a smile. "And who's read enough of that Bible to believe in miracles." His eyes met mine and I saw something unshakable there, a decision already made. "I won't order you," I said. "You don't have to," he squeezed my shoulder. "Just tell my folks I did my best if it comes to it." Before I could form the words to stop him, he was gone, slithering along the ditch, then bursting from it in a blur of motion. He sprinted along the hedgerow, every muscle in his tall frame straining. The machine gun swiveled, spitting sparks and flame. Dirt leaped at his feet, bits of hedge shredded. He dove into the gap, disappearing from our sight for one tense, breathless second. We heard shouts from the barn, a burst of frantic automatic fire. Then the heavy boom thump of grenades detonating inside, one after another, Eli emptying his bandolier into the nest. The machine gun's song cut off mid-burst, replaced by chaotic screams. "Go, go," I yelled, surging up. We poured through the hedgerow, storming the barn. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and dust, the floor littered with splintered wood and torn bodies in field gray. The gun lay toppled, barrel bent. Eli lay a few feet from the doorway on his back. A dark stain spread across his chest, and his fingers were slack around the last grenade he'd never had to throw. I dropped to my knees beside him. "Eli, Eli, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, focusing with difficulty. "Hey, Sarge," he whispered. His voice was a thin echo of itself. Did we get him?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile through the tightness in my throat. "You got him good, we're clear." That's something," he murmured. Doc skidded in, aid bag thumping. He pressed bandages to the wound, hands moving fast. Blood soaked through almost immediately. "Hold on, Walker," Doc said too loud, as if volume could change outcome. "Hold on." Eli's gaze shifted past me to a shaft of light falling through a crack in the roof. "Reckon I'll have that talk with the Lord sooner than I thought," he breathed. "You tell him we've got a bone to pick about this whole hedgerow business," Joey said thickly, kneeling on Eli's other side, tears carving tracks through the grime on his face. Eli's lips curved. "I will," he said, his eyes locked on mine one last time. "Take care of them, Sarge, they're good men." "I will," I said. His chest rose once more, then stilled. The light on his face didn't change, but everything else did. There are moments in war when your heart seems to crack, not in one clean break, but in a slow, grinding fracture that leaves pieces rattling forever after. That was one of mine. We buried Eli on a hillside under a makeshift cross carved from scrap wood. The chaplain said words that floated away on the wind. I stood there, helmet in my hands, and tried to reconcile the idea of divine plan with a man like Elijah Walker lying still beneath a foreign sky. "Maybe we're the plan," Sam said quietly afterward, when we sat together on an overturned ammo crate. "What do you mean?" I asked, voice hoarse. "Maybe there's no grand design," he said. "Maybe it's just us, the choices we make. Eli chose to save those men, you chose to let him try. The Germans chose to build their damned gun there, and now here we are trying to live with it." "You find that comforting?" I asked. He shrugged. "I find it honest, and maybe that's the best we get." As summer burned toward fall, we pushed on to St. Lo, to the ruined fortresses around Brest, where concrete and steel swallowed lives in exchange for yards gained. Brest was a hell of rubble and smoke, shattered buildings hiding snipers, shells falling without pattern or mercy. The Germans fought hard there, cornered animals with too much pride to admit defeat. One afternoon in that ruined city, we huddled in the basement of what had once been a cafe. The smell of char and dust lay heavy. Above, the thud of artillery shook plaster from the ceiling. We'd been ordered to hold that position while the rest of the company flanked. "Place had good coffee once," Doc said, nudging a cracked porcelain cup with his boot. "You can tell by the cups." "Maybe Joey'll buy it for his cafe after the war," Sam said. "Rebuild it, call it Cafe Brest." "Now that's just bad for business," Joey retorted. "Nobody wants to be reminded of this place while they're drinking." We were joking, but the laughter came brittle and thin. Our eyes flicked too often to the stairway, ears straining for the scrape of boots that might not be ours. That was where I most clearly remember my near end. A shell landed somewhere close, too close. The world became a roar and a hammer blow. Something punched into my leg, hot and deep, and I found myself on the floor, ears ringing, vision gray at the edges. "Sarge," Charlie's voice seemed to come from far away. "Sarge." Hands grabbed me, dragged me into a corner. Dust thickened the air. I looked down and saw blood blooming through the torn fabric at my thigh. "Shrapnel," Doc said, appearing above me like some grim angel, his features sharpened by adrenaline. "Hold still." Am I done?" I asked, surprising myself with the calm in my own voice. In that instant, there was a detached curiosity, as if I were watching someone else's leg. Doc's fingers probed, quick and brutal. Pain exploded up my side, white and searing. Not today, he grunted. Lucky bastard, it missed the artery. You might limp, but you'll live. Shame, Joey sighed dramatically. Was hopping I'd get your stripes in the will. You try wearing these stripes, you'll throw 'em back in a week, I muttered. While Doc worked, while the building shuddered and dust fell and the sharp rattle of small arms fire echoed outside, a strange calm settled over me. This could have been it. If that shard of steel had come an inch this way or that, my story would have ended in a half-collapsed cafe in a city whose name would mean nothing to my family beyond a line in a letter. KIA Brest. I thought of my mother hanging laundry on the line behind our little house in Ohio. I thought of my father in the steel mill, face lined with years of heat and smoke. I thought of Sundays at the river as a boy skimming stones and believing the world would roll on forever, simple and sure. And I realized then, truly realized, that I might not see any of it again. It wasn't a heroic thought. It wasn't even particularly brave. It was just a cold stone dropped into a still pond, sending ripples through everything I'd taken for granted. Later, after they pulled the metal from my leg and wrapped it tight, they sent me back to a field hospital for a few weeks. I lay in a canvas ward, listening to the groans and mutters of men strapped into traction or wrapped so completely in bandages they looked like mummies. A nurse from Iowa took my temperature and told me I wouldn't be going back to the line for at least a month. Enjoy the rest, she said, you earned it. I lay in that incongruous safety, clean sheets under me, white canvas above, and felt more restless than I ever had on a battlefield. My men were out there without me. They could be taking fire right now. They could be making choices, facing fears, burying friends, and I wasn't there to carry my share of the weight. When my leg had knit enough to hobble, I pestered every doctor, every clerk. I requested, then demanded to be returned to my unit. You've got a ticket home if you want it, one weary captain told me, flipping through my chart. You've done more than enough. My men are still there, I said simply, so I should be too. He studied me a long moment, then sighed. You infantry types, gluttons for punishment, all right, but don't come crying to me when that leg aches every winter for the rest of your life. It does to this day, but I don't regret going back. By the time I rejoined Company A, autumn had bared the branches and painted the fields in mud. We crossed into Germany. The euphoria of liberation had drained away, replaced by a grim, grinding sense that the hardest miles might still be ahead. I found my squad in a rain-soaked copse, their foxholes half filled with water. They looked older somehow in the way they moved, in the way their eyes flicked up at the sound of my approach and then softened in recognition. Sarge, Joey scrambled up, nearly slipping in the muck. Look what the cat dragged back from the convalescent home. Harper, Sam said, standing more slowly. Relief loosened his shoulders. You're walking straight enough. What did I tell you? Doc called, emerging from a makeshift shelter of ponchos. Stubborn as a mule, took more than a little flying tin to keep you away from our charming company. Charlie just grinned, pure and unguarded for the first time in a long while. Good to have you back, Sergeant. I looked around. One face was missing that I dreaded not finding and yet had hoped against hope to see. Where's Eli? I asked, though I knew. Joey's eyes flickered. We'll show you later, he said quietly. We went that evening, just the squad, to the little marked grave line behind an old church where the chaplain had gathered the fallen as best he could. There, among the white crosses and stars of David, we found the one with Corporal Elijah Walker stamped into its metal tag. I stood there a long time, rain trickling down my collar. I talked to him in my head, things I'd wished I'd said earlier. How I wondered if I'd made the right call, letting him go to that barn. How his Bible was still in my pack, pages smudged, spine cracked. How I'd try, though I knew I'd fail, to be the sort of man he'd thought I was. Save us a seat, Eli, Joey murmured. Somewhere the chow's hot and the bullets are blanks. The war ground on, into places like the Huachin Forest, where the trees grew thick and dark and the ground was sown with mines, and the air filled with the hiss and crack of shells bursting in the canopy. It was a cold, wet, miserable campaign that chewed up divisions and gave back little but lists of names. In that dripping, shadowed world, we faced one of those small, private moral tests that never make it into the official histories. It was near dusk. We were dug in along a shallow ridge, mud and roots our only comfort. The Germans had pulled back during the day after a firefight that left the forest littered with bodies and broken branches. As the light faded to a murky gloom, we heard it, a voice faint and ragged calling out in German. Hilf bitte, Hilf. Help please, help. The voice came from somewhere out in the tangled underbrush beyond our lines. in the no-man's land between our foxholes and what had been German positions that morning. It rose and fell, strained and raw, clearly in pain. "Damn it," Joey muttered. "He's gonna give away our whole line if he keeps that up." "Maybe the Krauts will come back for him," another GI said. "They're as chewed up as we are," Sam replied. "Might not even know he's there." The cry came again, weaker, "Hilfs." Doc's jaw tightened. "That's a human being," he said. "That's the enemy," one of the newer replacements shot back. "You go out there, the snipers will cut you in half." Doc looked at me. "Sergeant, I have to go." "We're under orders to hold this line and not move after dark," I said. My stomach twisted because I already knew where this was going. "We break that rule every time we stick our heads up to see if the sky's still there," Doc said. "I can't just lie here and listen to him die slow." "Doc." He cut me off, eyes blazing in the dim. "If that was one of ours out there, what would you say?" The forest seemed to press in. The faint smell of cordite hung in the damp air. I thought of all the wounded I'd seen, of their eyes as they clung to any hand within reach. "If you go, you could get yourself killed," I said. He smiled, a lopsided twist. "I could get myself killed staying here too. War's funny like that." The voice in the darkness cried again, a raw animal sound. I closed my eyes briefly. I saw Eli running toward that barn. I saw the shaved woman in the village square. I saw Isaac Brown's truck disappearing into the night. "All right," I said quietly. "We'll cover you, but you keep low, you hear me, and you come back whether that German does or not." Doc nodded once. "Yes, Sergeant." He stripped off his helmet, replacing it with his Red Cross armband pulled high and his medic's bag slung over his shoulder. Then he slid over the edge of the foxhole and vanished into the brush. We watched, muscles taut, hearts pounding. The forest seemed suddenly full of eyes. Joey's hands tightened around his bar. Sam's fingers hovered near the radio handset. Charlie swallowed audibly. We saw only the faintest movement, a darker shadow among shadows as Doc crawled toward the sound. The cries grew louder, then cut off abruptly with a startled gasp when Doc reached him and spoke, probably a few comforting words of English the man couldn't understand but whose tone would have said enough. Minutes stretched, a flare arced lazily up somewhere in the distance, washing the trees in cold, artificial light. I held my breath, certain that any second a shot would crack and Doc's form would jerk and fall. None came. At last we heard the soft rustle of someone returning. Doc slid back into the foxhole, panting, spattered with mud. His eyes were bright, but his hands shook. "Well," Joey demanded. "He's not going to make it," Doc said tiredly. "Stomach wound, bad one. I did what I could to ease it." He stared down at his stained hands, flexing them. He couldn't have been more than 18, kept saying mutter. "Mother." Sam exhaled slowly. "You did the right thing." Doc gave a harsh, humorless laugh. Maybe, or maybe I just made his last half hour a little less lonely in exchange for giving the snipers a good target. He looked at me. "Would you have stopped me, Sarge, if I'd been going after one of ours?" "No," I admitted. "Then I'm glad you didn't stop me for him either." That night, lying in my damp hole, listening to the wind moan through the branches like distant artillery, I thought of that German boy. Of how, under different flags and mothers, he might have been sitting in a foxhole with me instead of bleeding into foreign soil. The sharp edges of enemy and friend blurred for a moment, leaving only the ache of wasted youth. The war ended, as wars do, not with a single glorious charge, but with a long, stumbling series of steps until one day someone said, "It's over," and the guns, so long a part of the world's heartbeat, began to fall silent. We were in a small German town when we heard. The streets were scarred, the houses pocked with holes, the people thin and wary. A runner came with the news, breathless. "Germany surrendered," he said. "It's done." We stared at him, uncomprehending at first. Done? How could something that had filled every waking moment for so long simply be over? Slowly, the realization seeped in. Men laughed or cried or simply sat down where they were, staring at their hands as if they belonged to someone else. Joey whooped, grabbed Charlie, and spun him in a clumsy circle. "Hey," Charlie protested, grinning. "Put me down, you lunatic." Sam lit a cigarette, his fingers unsteady, and watched the smoke curl upward. "Somewhere out there," he said quietly, "they're opening gates." "What gates?" I asked. "Camps," he said. He'd heard rumors, we all had. "Places where my people and others were kept, starved, worse. The sooner our boys get there, the better." We didn't see a big camp. That fell to other divisions, other men. But we did stumble on a smaller forced labor site on the outskirts of a factory the week before the surrender. The prisoners there were walking skeletons in ragged stripes, eyes too large for their faces. The way they looked at us, fear and hope and numbness all tangled together, burned itself into me as surely as any firefight. One of them, a man with a thick black beard gone mostly gray, reached out and touched the star on Sam's dog tag where it showed at his collar. "Yid?" he asked in a hoarse croak. Sam's throat worked. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, Jew." The man's eyes filled. He said something in rapid Yiddish, a flood of syllables I couldn't follow. Sam answered, voice breaking. They clutched each other's arms, strangers bound by a shared language and a pain I could only dimly understand. On the day the war officially ended, we stood in that ruined German town, watching villagers and soldiers alike stumble through the first day of a new world. Lieutenant Hanover gave a small, tired speech about duty and rebuilding. Doc cleaned his instruments with a care that suggested he couldn't imagine a life without wounds to tend. Joey talked loudly about all the things he was going to do now, mostly involving food, women, and never again sleeping in a hole he'd dug himself. Charlie looked at me, eyes wide and oddly young. "So what now, Sergeant?" "Now," I said, looking around at the shattered windows, the bent lampposts, the people sweeping broken glass from thresholds. I thought of Ohio, of quiet streets and factory whistles. I thought of Eli's grave, of Isaac's truck, of a faceless German boy whispering for his mother in the dark. "Now we go home," I said. "If we're lucky, we find jobs, we get married maybe. We have kids who complain about homework and laugh at Saturday matinees. And when they ask us what we did in the war, we tell them about the men we knew." "Think it'll be that simple?" Joey asked. "No," I said, "but we can hope." Years later, decades really, I went back to France. The war had been over longer than it had lasted. The hedgerows had grown thick over scars. Children played soccer in fields that had once known only the tread of boots and the shriek of shells. I walked up from the beach at Vierville-sur-Mer, my cane tapping on the path, my breath coming a little shorter than it once had. The sand was quiet now, gulls wheeling in a sky that had forgotten the taste of smoke. At the Normandy American Cemetery, rows of white crosses and stars of David stood in perfect lines under a soft wind. Grass so green it hurt the eyes rippled between them. The sea whispered below. I found Eli's name among thousands on a wall of the missing, where those whose graves were lost to the chaos are carved into stone. I found the markers of men from our regiment, from Company A, from 2nd Platoon. Some I remembered clearly, and some whose faces I could no longer call up, only the sound of their laughter or the way they hummed a tune off-key. I stood there, old bones aching, and spoke their names aloud. Joey Russo, who did in fact open a cafe in Brooklyn after the war, Joey's Place, where any soldier who wore a 29th patch ate for half price, until a car on a wet road took him years later. Sam Levine, who became a lawyer, fighting his battles in courtrooms instead of fields, sending his own children to college under a sky that never rained shrapnel. Doc Santoro, who finally finished medical school, his hands still steady even when arthritis came knocking. And Eli, who never came home to Kansas, whose Bible sits now on my nightstand, pages worn thin by my own fingers as I searched them for whatever comfort he'd found. People talk about war in terms of battles won and lost, lines on maps, treaties signed. Those are the big movements, the grand sweeps. But in the end, war is made up of small things. A medic crawling toward a voice in the dark, a corporal sprinting toward a barn, a kid from Alabama standing his ground when his legs want to run, a man from Brooklyn cracking a joke when all that makes sense is to cry. If there is any bravery in my story, it is theirs. If there is any heroism, it lies in the moments when ordinary men did what they had to, not because they weren't afraid, but because they were and went anyway. I am Staff Sergeant Daniel Edward Harper, Rifle Squad Leader, Company A, 116th Infantry, 29th Division. Once, long ago, I was one of a great many young men sent to cross a strip of sand under fire. Many of us did not make it beyond that first furious morning. Those of us who did have spent a lifetime trying to be worthy of it. When I stand today among those white stones and look out over the quiet sea, I remember them. I tell their stories as best I can with the voice I was allowed to keep. And in the soft hush of the wind through the crosses, I like to think I hear them answer just faintly, present, here, forever.